So we have the equation 2x plus 1 equals 9. If we're using our manipulatives, we know that the long rectangles are our x values. And I see that this 2 is positive, so I'm going to make sure that I have 2 of them facing the green side, because the green side is positive and the red side is negative. So I have 2x, and then right here it tells me that I have plus 1. And I know that my constant, the single numbers, are my little squares. And it's going to be the same thing. The red is our negative and the yellow is our positive. So since that one's a positive one, I'm going to go ahead and put 1 right there. Now on the other side, I have positive 9. So let's go ahead and put 9 of those. Alrighty. Now, we can think of x as it being you. You are x, and you're tied to your parents or your guardians because you live at home with them. And then the pluses over here, or the minuses, those are your friends. Now, it's time for your friends to go home, so we need to move them to the other side of that equal sign. So the only way that we can send them home is if we do the inverse operation. We do the opposite operation. So right here I see that it has plus 1. The inverse of that, the opposite, will be a negative 1. So that means I need to get one of these negatives and pair it up right there. Whatever I do to this side, I need to do to the other side, because guess what? They moved from your house and are now back at their house. So let's go ahead and do that same thing to the other side. Okay. So now I am left with 2x. And then I know anytime that I see zero pairs like this, a positive and a negative, they cancel each other out. We call those zero pairs, so we can get rid of those. So we don't have that there anymore. I do still have my equal sign. And I'm going to do the same thing over here. I have 9 minus 1. I see a positive and a negative. That's a zero pair, so I'm going to go ahead and cancel those out. And that means that I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 positive remaining on that side. And we know that's true because 9 minus 1 gives me 8. So, yes, you're tied to your parents or guardians, but we still just want to figure out how much 1x is worth. How much are you? And so what I'm going to be doing is, again, I'm going to be doing the inverse operation, the opposite operation. I know when I have a number and a variable like this right next to it, that means that I'm multiplying. So for me to do the opposite of that, I'm going to have to divide. Now, you can put divide by 2, or we also know that a fraction means to divide. So when I see this, I know it's saying 8 divided by 2. And so the way we can do that with our manipulatives, it means that I'm going to be splitting each one of these into one of those x values until I have none left. And since we want x isolated, we want to know how much just one of these x's is, then I'm going to be looking at that x right there. I know that x is equal to 1, 2, 3, 4. And I know that that's true because 8 divided by 2 is 4. All right, now there's a way that we can double check our work. I'm going to scoot these to the side. A way that we can double check our work, which is what we'll always want you to do to make sure you're right, is I'm going to rewrite my original equation. So I had 2, and instead of putting x, I know what x should equal now. X should be equal to 4 for this equation. So I'll replace that x with a 4, and I know that that is plus 1, and then that should equal 9. And if we remember our order of operations from 6th grade, we know that we need to multiply first. So I have 2 times 4. 2 times 4 gives me 8. And then if I add this 1 that's remaining from over here, it should equal 9. And I know that 8 plus 1, that does equal 9. So 9 is equal to 9. That means that this is correct. So x will equal 4. All right, so for our next equation, we have 3n plus 2 equals 11. Now, it might be a little different to see the variable n, but since that's still just a letter that's holding the place for a real number, that's still our variable. So right now I'm going to pause it. I want you to go ahead and show me what does this look like using your algebra tiles. All right, so you should have already gone ahead and selected what it'll look like. Let's go check if you're right. So I see that I have 3 variables that are positive, so that means they should be on my green side. So 1, 2, 3. And then I see that it's positive 2, a plus 2. So I'm not facing my red side, I'm facing the yellow side. So I have 2 of those. And on the other side of my equal sign, I have a positive 11. So again, those should have been our yellow ones. I'm going to make sure I do 11 of those. All right, so this is what your algebra tile should have looked like. If you did that correct, awesome sauce. And if not, make sure that you're learning from your mistakes. So again, our variable is you. Currently, you are tied to your family at home, but they want your friends to go home. So the only way we can make your friends go home is by doing the inverse, the opposite operation. Since I see that I have positive 2, the opposite, the inverse of that will be a negative 2. That way they can go home to their house. So I'm going to do the same thing with my algebra tiles. I have 2 negatives, and I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. So we're moving on. Remember, I have a positive and a negative. They cancel each other out. They are 0 pairs, so I can take that pair out, and I can take that pair out. So on this side of my equation, I still have 3n. And on my other side, I had 11 minus 2. Again, these are 0 pairs, so I can take that one out and that one out. And 11 minus 2 should give me 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. All right, your friends have gone home. It's time for you to go to your room, so we want to know how much is it for just you? How much is it for just the variable n? We want to isolate it. I see that this right here, 3 next to my variable, that means I'm multiplying. So the opposite of that will be to divide. And remember, the fraction sign means division. And since I'm dividing, that means I'm going to go ahead and separate these and split all of these into those. So that means that just one variable will be equal to 1, 2, 3. All right, now before we say that's our final answer, let's go ahead and just make sure that that work is correct. So I'm going to rewrite my equation. Instead of putting the variable, I'm going to put the actual number. But the rest of it will look the same. Okay, so if I remember my order of operations, I know multiplication is first. 3 times 3 gives me 9. And I'm going to make sure I continue to bring down that 2 because we have not added that yet. And then the last part is to do 9 plus 2, which 9 plus 2 gives me 11. Is 11 equal to 11? Yes, it is. So we know that that answer is correct. All right, for our third question, we have negative 4y plus 2 equals negative 2. Again, this variable right here, it does not matter if it's x. As long as it's a letter, I should know that it's a variable. So right now I'm going to pause the video so that you can go ahead and show me what will that look like when you use your algebra tiles. I see that I have 4 negatives for my variables. That means I'm going to flip that over to the negative side, which should have been the red side. I see that I have 2 positive added to that, so since that's a constant, I'm going to make sure it's the little squares, and since they're positive, they're going to be facing the yellow side. And on the other side of the equal sign, I have negative 2, so that should be the negative side, which is red. Alrighty, so again, this is you. You are currently home and your parents or guardians want your friends to go home. The only way they can go home is if they do the opposite, the inverse operation. So they can go home. So since I did the inverse, that means that I need 2 negatives. And what I do to one side of my equation, I need to make sure I do to the other side. Okay. I see some 0 pairs right here, and that's because they went home. So that still leaves me with negative 4y. And on my other side, I had negative 2 minus 2. So if I have negative 2 and then I have another negative 2, that leaves me with 4 negative. All right, so I still don't know what the value of just 1y is. So I'm going to do the inverse operation. I know this number with this means that it's being multiplied. So the inverse of that is to divide, because our fraction sign means to divide. So that means I'm going to be separating these 4. And that means since I'm dividing, I'm also separating these into each one of these. Awesome. So I see that this is a negative side. I don't want to know what a negative y is. I want to know what just a positive y is. So actually, I'm going to have to flip this over. And guess what? Since I had to flip that over, I also have to flip this one over. So that means I can do that to all of these. However, I only want to know how much just one of these is worth. So how much is just one y value worth? I know that it's equal to a positive 1. And that's because a negative 4 divided by a negative 4 gives me a 1. All right, let's go ahead and check our work on the other side. Negative 4. Instead of a y, I'm going to replace it with a positive 1. Plus 2, and that's a negative 2. Now I'm going to use my algebra tiles to show you, because some of you do some silly mistakes whenever you multiply or divide or add or subtract integers, negative numbers. All right, so right here it says that I have negative 4 times 1, and I'm going to do this step first because multiplication comes first. If I have one group of negative 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, I have one group of these. Here's my one group of negative 4. That means that negative 4 times 1 gives me negative 4. And then if I add positive 2, let me go ahead and add positive 2. I know that I have a 0 pair right here and another 0 pair right here. So that leaves me with 2 that are negative. Is negative 2 equal to negative 2? It sure is, which means that this answer is correct. Our fourth equation is 2a minus 3 equals negative 5. So right now I'm going to go ahead and pause the video so that you can show me what that looks like with your algebra tiles. Since I had 2 positive variables, I had them on the green side. I know that subtraction means negative, so I had 3 of those on the red side, and then we had our negative 5. So this is what it should have looked like. Right now I'm going to go ahead and pause the video so that you can try solving this equation on your own. All right, let's see if your work is correct. So I have 2a minus 3 equals negative 5. We are trying to get this variable alone, so let's go ahead and move your friends on over to their house. The way we do that is by doing the inverse operation. So the inverse of subtracting 3 is adding 3. And since they've moved over from your house, they've moved over to this side. So let's go ahead and show that by doing the opposite of negative 3 to both sides. So I see some 0 pairs right here that we can knock out. And same on this other side. So that leaves us with 2a. And negative 5 plus 3 left me with negative 2. Let's isolate our variable, so let's get that by itself. Since I have 2 of those, I want to go ahead and split these over. And that means that a positive variable will give me a -1. And that's because a -2 divided by a 2 will give me that -1. Let's go ahead and check our work. I'm going to write my equation. Instead of putting my variable, I'm going to put the -1. So I have two groups of -1. Here is my 1 and my second group with a -1 in it, and that means that I have a total of -2. And I want to subtract 3. So I have 1, 2, 3. And that should equal -5. So if I have 1, 2, 3, and another 2 negative, I do have -5. And I know that -5 is equal to -5, so this answer is correct.